This year, there will be no leftovers. This is the No Fear podcast. We know it scares you.
I'm Matt,
And I'm Lisa.
and this is the No Fear Cast, the podcast where we dissect horror and all the things that scare us. Turkey Day is coming this week, so you know what that means. We watched Eli Roth's Thanksgiving.
We absolutely did watch Eli Roth's Thanksgiving just in time for Thanksgiving 2024. All right, so just a little bit about this movie if I guess some of our listeners aren't familiar with all the backstory behind it. This started off way back in 2007 when the movie Grindhouse was released. So Grindhouse was made up, to fit with the whole Grindhouse film genre. It was two movies that were put together. It was Planet Terror was the first one, and then Death Proof. And in between the movies, um, they had, I think, five fake trailers that different horror movie directors got together and made. One of them was Thanksgiving, and it was supposed to be, it was one that Eli Roth did for the Grindhouse movie. Two others, by the way, of those fake trailers have also been made into full movies, Machete and Hobo with a Shotgun. So that's where this kind of originated. But I went and did a little bit of a deep dive into this. So, okay, first, if y'all don't know, again, I'm assuming most of our listeners know this, but if you don't, it's fine. Grindhouse is a subgenre of film. It's generally low budget, kind of splatter fests. We get the term, the idea of like grinding out films or a grinder who would stand outside of a theater or a show and try to get people to come in and watch them. They would often show several movies at once. So you'd come in, you'd buy a ticket, and you'd get to sit through like three or four movies. Um, but again, it's known for being really kind of low budget, not having really the most I don't know how this is not elevated horror, I guess is what I'm trying to say. It has a lot in common with its sister subgenres of like sleaze and exploitation. So that's the idea behind this. So you need to know that going in. I mean, you don't really, but here's the lore behind the Thanksgiving film that came out in 2023. So this is according to filmmaker Eli Roth. He said that he envisioned that there was this film that was made, you know, I don't know. I think he said, let's pretend it's 1980. I think he said when the original Thanksgiving was supposed to have come out. And it's about a kid who's in love with a turkey. And then his father killed it. And then he killed his family and went away to a mental institution and came back and took revenge on the town. So, very much like a Halloween kind of thing, except on Thanksgiving. So, you have this like kid who's gone away to an asylum, who's grown up and now come back. Um, anyway, Roth went on to say that he was thinking about it because he didn't want the full length film to be that. So he said, "Okay, I'm imagining that this real film was made around like 1980, that it was so offensive that every print was destroyed, all the scripts were burned, the director disappeared, the crew members changed their name, but one person saved the trailer and uploaded it to the darkest corners of the 4chan, and now it's made it out." So that's what he's imagining with this like all we have left of this old horror film is the trailer. So he was envisioning that then somebody saw that and made a 2023 reboot. And anyway, I kind of like that. I kind of like that this little film has this whole like backstory behind it. This was in Total Film magazine, by the way. Apparently, where Eli Roth was saying some of this stuff. So that's a bit about Thanksgiving. Again, it was originally a fake trailer in 2007's Grindhouse. People loved it. I remember really loving it in the theater. And people were really pushing Eli Roth to make it. And finally, in 2023, we got to see his Thanksgiving. And so yeah, so that's what we have in this film. It was directed by Eli Roth. The screenplay was by Jeff Rindle. And it stars Patrick Dempsey, Addison Rae, Gina Gershon. There's several people you probably recognize in this film. But before we get much further, Matt, uh, I am I'm very curious to hear your initial thoughts on this film.
Well, as I was saying briefly before we started the actual recording, I loved it. I thought this was so much fun. Um, I know we were like texting earlier too about it, and I mentioned that I had forgotten that this was Eli Roth. I just went into it, was like, oh, that's right. We said we were going to be watching Thanksgiving, and pulled it up on Netflix and just started watching it, and it didn't really register until a certain scene about three-quarters of the way in, maybe a little further in, and I'm sure we'll talk about that scene in specifics. But it's very over the top, gory, gruesome, disturbing, and I was like, oh, that's right, it's Eli Roth. It's it's not it's not what I would consider, like you said, this is not highbrow horror. This is not the sort of horror that is made to really make you think or anything like that. I mean, it is absolutely a slasher in all regards. It really it really knows what it is and is not trying to be anything but what it is, and is having fun with the genre, even though I think, a lot of the characters and the plot, they fall into stereotype, but I think that's fine because the movie's not trying to do anything but make a good slasher movie. And the formula is for a reason. And yeah, I loved it. It was just a blast. Also, just want to say, I thought Patrick Dempsey did a pretty darn good job with the Massachusetts accent. He kind of slipped out of it occasionally, but he really was getting that Massachusetts accent, which hats off to him for that, because it's not the easiest of accents to do.
He really did. He really did pull it off well. I noticed that that too. Yeah, so a couple of things. Yeah, I really enjoyed it. I feel like for the majority of Eli Roth's career, I mean, there's definitely a few I can think of that were not my favorites, but a lot of his I think are kind of fall into this category of this Thanksgiving movie where it really knows what it's doing, and it does it well, and it's not trying to be anything other than what it is, which is nice because when you want to watch a slasher, sometimes it's nice just to know what you're getting. This one in particular, it really reminded me of, and we've talked about this, oh gosh, many seasons ago on this podcast, but um where following, like, there was Black Christmas, which was, I don't know, it's kind of considered like, sometimes they call it the first slasher, sometimes the first like proto slasher. I don't know where people and film critics really want to draw that line, but you have something like Black Christmas, and then that was followed by Halloween, and Halloween was originally supposed to be um just a standalone. I mean, we talked about that when we talked about the Halloween movies. And it wasn't, I guess it was because of the popularity that we got Mike Myers coming back over and over and over again. But originally it was supposed to come be a slasher, the same type of movie, but set on a different holiday or with a different storyline. Again, that's why like Halloween 3 Season of the Witch doesn't have Michael Myers in it, because they were trying to go with that original formula. Um, this one though, it reminds me of some of those other like holiday movies that are like they're not as good. They're not as good as like Black Christmas or Halloween, but they're still enjoyable, like April Fool's Day or My Bloody Valentine, and Thanksgiving I think kind of sets here, and it's funny because when I thought, okay, how are they really going to do a slasher set on Halloween or on Thanksgiving and like make it not seem just kind of eye rollingly cheesy? And the first thing they did, like you said, they set it in Plymouth, Massachusetts, which makes sense. It makes sense for that town to want to center all their celebrations around Thanksgiving because it's like the place of the first Thanksgiving and they're all handing out these like John Carver masks and um so yeah, that makes sense to me. And I don't know, I thought it was super fun. But I also love kind of imagining that this was in that, I guess it goes back to Eli Roth lore, but that this was set in that kind of like this world where people were still trying to make holiday slashers a thing. Um, because it definitely felt like that. Anyway, and I think with the teens too. We'll jump into the movie actually, but this is the last thing. With the teens too, I felt like this was almost kind of a throwback to some of the 90s slasher movies that I loved. Like this had a lot of, I think structurally, a lot in common with things like I Know What You Did Last Summer. It's just a lot gorier. I mean, it is Eli Roth, right? And we'll talk about that, I think, that scene. If I'm thinking of the one you're thinking of, then yeah, we'll have to talk about it. But listeners, this is my official warning here that we're going to spoil this movie. If you want to be surprised, and want to go see it, you can catch it on Netflix currently. I don't know how long it's planning on staying there, but again, I'm going to give you a brief rundown of the film, but we will spoil it. So that's your warning from this point on. um, all right, so it takes place obviously in Thanksgiving, in Plymouth, Massachusetts, and the idea is that there's this store called Right Mart, and I apologize, guys. My dogs decided to get right under the microphone and give their 2 cents on this movie too, if you're hearing them. But there's this store called Right Mart, and it's having this big Black Friday sale, and they've decided to open up early. So they're going to get kind of a head start on Black Friday and start it like Thanksgiving night. So after everybody's had their like turkey and dressing and pumpkin pie, they all come out to come shopping. But the problem is that there's this big incident where people are trampled, and it's obviously, this has happened in the news in the past. I mean, I remember hearing about it um, different times. It's Eli Roth. He's like making it extra gory. So the movie actually starts with that, and then it's a year later again on Thanksgiving, and now there is a murderer stalking the people who were involved in the original Black Friday event. So somebody who's wearing a John Carver mask and is running around and going to take down each person one by one. And there's a nice little social media aspect to it because he taunts his victims by showing them like a Thanksgiving table with their names on it, and basically sets out one by one going to kill them in very creative ways. If you can think about everything that would you would do on Thanksgiving, every utensil you would use, anything that would be in and around a Thanksgiving table, Eli Roth's going to use it in this movie to kill people. I will say it is very clever. There are a lot of fun puns in this movie, some jokes and one liners that kind of made me laugh out loud and then feel very bad for laughing at them. And just again, how tightly written this movie is. It really is spoiled. The ending is kind of spoiled right in the beginning. Like you kind of hear everything. If you know what to look for in the very beginning in like the first scene or whatever. So I thought that was kind of fun. But again, we can talk about all that. So I don't know, Matt, where do you want to jump in with this movie?
I don't know if we should kind of go beginning to end or just kind of jump around, but there's a lot to talk about. I was going to just kind of piggyback though on something that you said about how it reminded you of like 90s slashers in particular. My wife and I watched this together the other night to prepare for the podcast, and there was a scene kind of early on. I think it was the first time the teens get tagged on not Instagram, but whatever the movie version of Instagram is for legal purposes, by John Carver. uh, she looked at me and said, "I know what you did last Thanksgiving," and I was like, "Yeah, that's perfect," because it really does have a lot of those same sort of inspirations, if you will. So, um, as far as where to begin, I mean, I guess we should probably, I guess, talk maybe a little more in depth about the events on Black Friday because I thought that that was a really a really good, effective setup for the whole plot of the film because I mean, this movie comes out in 2023. None of us are strangers to Black Friday at this point, and in particular, I mean, it seems like there are lots of times where people get trampled or injured or something in some sort of Black Friday rush. I mean, I haven't heard about them as much in recent years. I think people are maybe the stores are taking better precautions or I don't know. But I mean, I do remember hearing stories of people being trampled and at least being hospitalized, if not dying, and all over, you know, cheap cheap stuff for I guess Christmas or whatever. And in the case of this movie, part of it was a free raffle iron for the first 100 people who purchased something. I mean, but to see the crowd out there getting angrier and angrier as you the viewer are watching this, I mean, you know something bad is going to happen, and the way that like he strings it along and builds it up until it just explodes basically was I thought it was really well done. And it actually surprised me the social commentary that was kind of happening there as well in a movie like this, which we've already admitted is not aiming to be high art. This is not Oscar bait. It's not trying to shoot for the moon. But I mean, I thought that was a very effective opening scene, and it lasts. It's about a solid like 15 to 20 minutes in the buildup before you even get to the current day of a year later with the time jump. So, I mean, I don't know if you have anything to add there, but I thought it was a very effective opening sequence.
Yes, I agree. It was really effective at building suspense. It was one of these things where you could see it happening and it was kind of a slow train wreck. And then it did not shy away once the violence hit the screen, it didn't shy away from showing it. And I think getting to know some of the characters too helped because then um when you see them um get injured or die, it does change things. In particular, I'm thinking about Gina Gershon's character. She had gone to visit her husband, who was a manager there, and bring him some like leftovers, all nicely boxed up, because he had to miss dinner. And again, I did think that that was a nice little, like you said, kind of a social commentary because it wasn't just talking about like the rampant consumerism that was taking over people's judgment. But also this idea that Thanksgiving is supposed to be this day that you spend with your family and share what you're grateful for and enjoy your life. And then here's this man who can't. And then his wife dies horribly in front of him. In a very, I think, brutal scene. um but yeah, I enjoyed it. I did think it was a pleasant surprise to see that there was that kind of social commentary on the holiday season. and how we react as people to some of that. So yeah, I thought that was nice and sufficiently gory. Sufficiently gory. So if that's something that I think, I don't know. I feel like that's what people expect when they go to see an Eli Roth movie though.
Oh, absolutely, and you're right that it did not shy away from the gore, even in some cases where you kind of wish it would. I thought Gina Gershon's character, her death was especially like one that was kind of hard to watch because part of like her head gets hit by a shopping cart because she's knocked to the ground and then gets hit by a shopping cart, and then part of her hair gets caught up in the wheels, I guess, and it like rips part of her scalp off. And yeah, it does not look away. It shows you all of that in true Eli Roth fashion. And that's just the tip of the gore iceberg, really. I feel like we have a lot more coming to talk about gore wise, but
Yeah, I think so. Okay, so just let's get some of these characters out that we're going to follow for a while. And then I'm going to ask you about some of these kill scenes because I feel like we need to talk about some of them in depth. Okay, so when the movie starts, you kind of see several families. One of them being Amanda Collins, who's the one Gina Gershon's character. She is at her family home, visited by Patrick Dempsey, who plays a cop, as you said, Matt, with a very convincing, I think, Massachusetts accent. Um, so he goes to visit her. He's going to be the like main police presence who investigates and tries to figure out who's doing the killing. Um, and then you also meet another character, family. You have Gabby, whose father owns no, I'm sorry. You have Jessica. I'm getting their names confused already. Jessica, whose father owns the store, the Right Mart store where this takes place. And she has with her her friends Gabby, Bobby, Evan, Scuba, and Yulia. And she lets them in around this side of the building because they need to grab something. And so she's just like, just let's get in and avoid the crowds. And that's in part what starts the riot because they're a foot the boys who are with her are on a football team with their high school, and they had gotten in a rival with another football team, and they see them out in the crowd and they kind of start shouting at each other and just stupid like team rivalry stuff. But then when they see them going in the side of the building, it kind of incites everything because they're like, well, wait a minute, why do they get to go in when we're all out here waiting to go in? And so that's why this particular um, group of teens are, as you said, I know what you did last Thanksgiving. um, I think that's why these group of teens are being followed. And so then a year later, you find out that Jessica is living in the town, but her boyfriend, Bobby, has been gone for a year. He had his arm injured in the incident, and he cannot now play football anymore. And so he kind of just, as he says, he ghosts everybody, including her. And so it's kind of suspicious when he comes back. It kind of reminded me of Scream a little bit in that, where you're kind of like, oh, is the boyfriend the killer or not? Because, of course, a good slasher, you've got to try to figure out who the killer is, right? Um, Jessica at home has some problems because she's got a new stepmom, Kathleen, who she hates and is kind of like taking over things. So she's not really happy with that. Her dad's trying to deal with the bad press that he's gotten from his last one, and so he wants to do like a new Black Friday sale, but he wants to have extra security and things like that. But he's getting a lot of flack from the public for that. Um, yeah, and then you kind of have the other. I mean, I'll be honest, the other teens are kind of. They're in a way just kind of placeholders. Um, but it ends up being a little love triangle because Jessica starts dating this other guy. Um, while she's now that Bobby's come back and there's kind of some will they, won't they, I guess. But so yeah, so that's a little bit about the people that we're following. But one by one, this John Carver assailant or slasher, I don't know what we'll just call him John Carver, um, is going around and is killing them. So, Matt, favorites when it comes to because I mean, really, this movie is one of these that once it gets going, you're just kind of waiting, watching them go from kill to kill to kill. So, as you do in a slasher, but um, there are some really, I think, great. There's some great kills in this movie. So I don't know. What are some of your favorites?
I think my favorite is probably Yulia. She's killed a little bit later, kind of midpoint of the movie, maybe towards the end of the second act. She's one of the teens. She's the Scuba's girlfriend, and I love the fact that they call him Scuba. By the way, they give just a quick explanation. Like his last name is sounds very similar to Diver. I can't remember the exact pronunciation, but it's very close to Diver, so they call him Scuba. Um, but I think my favorite is hers. Her dad, who is very definitely not in the Russian mafia, because he totally looks like he's in the Russian mafia, uh, gets freaked out and says that he's taking her to Florida for her safety. And the killer gets into their house that's in the middle of being remodeled, and she ends up getting falling onto a table saw that's been turned on, and it is just blood and guts. And I loved it. I thought that was a good one. Um, that's probably my favorite. Uh, the the stepmom, Kathleen, her death, I think we can probably discuss that one a bit because that was a little much even for me, and my taste is like usually I can handle gore and other stuff like that, but like I mean I didn't stop watching, I didn't get nauseated, but I was just like, wow, this was very intense because she does get cooked alive in a giant oven. And just like with Gina Gershon's death, the camera doesn't really look away until it's over. But those are probably my favorite, although I didn't love the cooking death. I think it was a very creative one for sure.
The stepmom in the oven was one of my, I think, top ones. I mean, if there's a movie called Thanksgiving, somebody is going to have to die in an oven. And of course, she's going to be the one cooked and put on the table. Eventually, he brings all of his victims together at this table that he's been taunting them with pictures of and videos of. And some of them are dead already, and some of them are tied up and like waiting to die. And he brings her out, kind of dressed up like a turkey. Um, it's grotesque. It was fun, I think, to watch because again, you just kind of when you think about a movie like Thanksgiving, you're thinking, okay, how are people going to die? It has to be one of those things. Um, there's also the great line where earlier she's speaking to the cop and she's saying, I have to make dinner and I'm nervous. And, he says, oh, I know you're going to make a great dinner. And of course, she ends up becoming dinner later. So there are little like lines like that throughout the movie that I think just kind of add to the playfulness of it. And again, why you want to watch it. Another guy who, gosh, I think he was one of the, I think, two security guards that they hired. And he ends up leaving town. Several characters try to leave town once they realize what's happening, which I appreciated because I thought, that's very I know, I like seeing that in a horror movie because I'm always like, "Why aren't these people just leaving? Why aren't they getting out of town? Why are they, just staying there waiting for the killer?" You did have a couple of characters, Yulia being one of them. Her father says she's gonna take take them away, they don't. They can't leave, but then you have that other character, who realizes he's being targeted and is going to leave, and as he's packing up, gets killed by um, one of those electric turkey carvers. Um, which, one of those like vibrating knives or whatever. I thought that was really kind of a fun thing to watch because watching that whole sequence that he's being stalked by the killer and he knows it too. So when it happens, it feels like a fun setup with a really good payoff. Something I didn't expect to see in a Thanksgiving horror movie was, a cheerleader dying on a trampoline. Um, but now that's a new fear that is unlocked. Um, sometimes you just yeah, that, I never had a fear of trampolines before, but now I'm gonna have to, like, check underneath them before I get on them. Just like I have to look under the bed now that I've seen Pet Cemetery. Um,
I will
I think
say
that's done it
I
for
kind
me.
of I kind of agree with you on that being sort of a new fear, but I don't think it's going to be a big impediment for me. I don't tend to get on trampolines very often. At this point, I would probably just hurt myself more than anything.
Well, I do have trampoline age children, and we have one in the backyard. So,
Fair enough. Fair enough.
granted, I will not be jumping on it alone in a cheerleading outfit. So, but yeah, the knife coming up from underneath and her not realizing it, and then when she's first stabbed, you kind of see her face and she knows what's happening, but then she's just bouncing because once you're on those things, you can't really get off very easily. And I thought that was kind of clever, but it was also one of those things where I was like, "Now come on, Carver. That took no effort. He just used
Well,
gravity."
but I will say though, because she does apparently survive that because we see her later being kept in a fridge when Kathleen, the stepmom, she does almost escape from the killer's lair, and while she's running away, she opens a fridge and sees the cheerleader, and the cheerleader says like, you know, gurgles out like, "Help me, don't leave me." And then of course she has to leave because the killer's coming. So, uh, not only did she have a fear-inducing death, she didn't die immediately. So, there's another fear to add to it.
Yeah, I will say in the kind of deviousness of these like killers, the Carver is one of the worst. Um, when you have a lot of these, you know, famous slashers, Michael Myers, Halloween, Jason Voorhees, or I guess his mother in the first one. But you have those, it really is just I'm gonna stalk you. I'm gonna slowly stalk you and I'm gonna kill you. And then it's over and done with. This one, there is an entire plan made, but a need for everything to work out for him. So, he has to bring the bodies to the table and he has to, if they're not dead, or I guess keep them alive until he needs them to be dead. And so there's this, I don't know, yeah. Um, which would be worse, to be killed immediately or to be almost killed and then uh sit there and have to wait until, I guess it was your time. I don't know. It's there was kind of a yeah, devious is the only word I can think of it, but again, it was kind of fun. It was a very theatrical, um, performative murder spree, I guess is what I'm the word I'm looking for.
I would definitely agree to that. Very performative, and I know we'll probably reveal who the killer is before the end of the episode that we're doing here, but I don't know that I'm quite ready to do that yet. But I will say that I thought it was interesting when Patrick Dempsey's character says somewhere in the middle of the movie that the killer has planned this all out very intricately. Like he says something to that effect, and I mean it made me think about how whoever it was, and we can talk about this too. That there's a lot of possibilities given to us, which I liked that. But like clearly, this is something that they have stewed on and festered on, and it is like the revenge is really really like important to them, and so they definitely want to have it be symbolic and whatnot, especially relating to the Black Friday massacre, or well, not massacre, but Black Friday tragedy, I guess, from the year before. But I did think they did a really good job of throwing suspicion on a lot of different characters throughout the movie because um, I had my suspicions who the killer was, and I was not right, but that the person who actually was the killer was my second choice. But yeah, they throw a lot of suspicion. Like you've got Mitch, the manager of the Right Mart, who has motive because his wife was killed in the massacre. You've got Bobby, the now ex-boyfriend of Jessica, the because his arm was broken and he lost his baseball scholarship to, I forget where they said he was, UCLA, maybe someplace like that. Um, you've got uh, you've got her current boyfriend, who seems sketchy because he did run into Jessica before the massacre, and he was kind of like a little like clearly in love with her and trying to like woo her while Bobby was away at college. So he had some kind of sinister stuff possibly going on there, and then they reveal that he knew the security guard that got trampled to death. Um, who else did they throw blame towards? Because those were the main ones, but I know that there was more.
Those were the main ones. Trying to I should have written it down, but yeah, those were the you had yeah, Amanda's husband Mitch because he was very vocal about even the store reopening. Um you had the ex-boyfriend, the new boyfriend. Hmm. I don't know. There were a few more though. You're right. There were a few more where you felt like it could be. Oh, there was the new deputy in town. I can't remember his
Yes.
name, but he was one where everybody was just kind of the idea of like being suspicious of the outsider, people who were showing up like right then. And they had also, they were really good, I think, at introducing the script was really good at introducing, as you said, motives for each person as to like why they would want this kind of level of revenge, what they had lost prior to that. um and then just, who was showing up at an opportune moment too. All of a sudden you had Bobby back. All of a sudden you had this new deputy who nobody really knew what his backstory was. And, did he have a connection to the people? That was, yeah. So that was another one. But you're right. There were a lot of good ones.
I mean, they did a really good job of painting it as Bobby because, like you said, after the Black Friday incident, he just disappears for a year, like completely drops off the face of the earth. He like literally ghosts Jessica, like she like doesn't even break up with her, just stops responding to her, and then all of a sudden he's back in town like right before these killings happen. It's like, oh well, that's awful convenient. But of course, me, the uh, horror aficionado, goes, but that's a little too convenient. He's got to be a red herring, or is he? And so, yeah, I did spend some time kind of bouncing around as the movie progressed, of wondering, okay, who is it really? Uh, I had predicted, I had thought that it was two people. I thought Roth was going to do a scream, and that there were going to be two killers in tandem. And I will say I was wrong about that. So uh, good for making me wrong, Eli.
I did wonder that. And I also want to say this was another thing that really reminded me. And I remember this the first time I watched this movie. I walked away thinking that it felt like that they were really leaning on the structure of I Know What You Did Last Summer. Because in that movie, Julie's character, the main like the main girl who we follow, like Jessica in this one, um, she had a boyfriend who was played by Freddie Prinze Jr., who after the like incident where they kill somebody, um, he goes away because he's been like a fisherman on a boat or something. I don't remember. It's been a while since I've seen that movie, but he comes back and everybody's very suspicious because he comes back at like right around the same time that people are dying. And so even at some point she starts to suspect him and think, maybe he's doing some of this. Um Also just weirdly in between these two, there were also uh two, I think, really effective in both of the films, parade scenes. Because of course, I Know What You
Mhm.
Did Last Summer, like, takes place on the 4th of July, so there's the 4th of July parade where they know there's a killer and they're looking for the killer on the in particular, Sarah Michelle Gellar's character is on that float. And there was a very similar scene in this one where there was like the big Thanksgiving parade. And of course, the carver comes during that and kind of sets off chaos. But just some, I think, fun little slasher synchronicities.
Well, and I will say about the parade scene, I mean, they do a good bait and switch of having, the tension of some, because that, the John Carver mask is a big thing in Plymouth. And so everybody in the parade route, like, lots of children, lots of parents are wearing John Carver masks. And we've got, some shots of somebody in a John Carver mask walking kind of scarily. Turns out they're protesting because of the deaths the year before. I did not have on my bingo card the killer being dressed as a clown in the parade, but he was 100% dressed as like a scary clown who then beheads somebody with an axe in broad daylight. I That was none of that was expected. I'll just say that much.
It was fun. That was a lot of fun. Yeah. There's so many just like unexpected. There are some things that you think, okay, yeah, like I said, somebody's gonna get cooked in an oven. You know that going in. But then there are some things like the clown decapitating somebody in broad daylight and getting and walking away. That was really unexpected. I feel like at this point, Matt, that we do need to talk about who the killer is. If that's cool with you.
I I
Um,
think I think we're there. And so, listeners, if you don't want this spoiled, you're gonna want to skip ahead a bit. We're recording this live, so I can't tell you exactly how long to skip ahead. But yeah, if you don't want this spoiled, go ahead and just like start hitting that 30-second jump button on your podcast app now until
okay.
we tell you.
So I will say this, and I thought this was brilliant. If you go to the opening of the movie opens from the point of view of the killer. It's one of those like Halloween, where you see it seems like this, like the camera is like lumbering up towards this door, and it's very much the like, ooh, something creepy is happening here. Um And then it kind of flips and you see that it's actually no, it's not a killer. It is Gina Gershon's character opening the door to Patrick Dempsey's character, Sheriff Eric Newland. And he is indeed the killer in this movie. I just thought that was so much fun. The whole time, yeah, you suspect him because you suspect everybody at some point. So it wasn't a huge shock to find out that it was the sheriff. Um, and he plays it so well, I should say. Like when he goes off in the last like quarter of the movie and everybody like he's the killer and he's just being the killer. Um he's wonderful. He's really wonderful in this. But yeah, I thought that was so brilliant because I thought, oh, we find out in the very beginning of the movie. It's just not told, but we literally get the lumbering point of view of the killer as he's walking up to Gina Gershon's door. And I will also say we get the motive too in that scene because she says, you're not going to stay single for long. Um, and it seems like just a throwaway line, but then we learn later that they were having an affair and she was pregnant and she was going to leave her husband for him and that they were going to like have like start their life over again. So in his mind, he not only lost the love of his life, but he lost his family, he lost this like new start. And so that's but it's all told there in the first few minutes of the film. You just have to know what you're looking for.
That's a really good catch. I had not noticed that about the "You're not going to stay single for long" line. I did I did notice the point of view from of the killer, but I didn't notice that. Wow. Yeah, it really is all right there. Uh, and I'll just agree. He definitely seemed like he was having a lot of fun chewing the scenery once it's revealed that he's the killer. Like he really just goes full slasher killer mode. Patrick Dempsey just seems like he's having a blast as the role. And he was actually my second pick as we were watching. I wasn't certain, but I was leaning towards Bobby, even though he was a little obvious. I thought they were doing the fake out by making him so obvious that he actually was. Um, but I thought it might be Bobby with somebody else. But I did notice throughout the movie because the sheriff is using Jessica, like she's giving him information by accident because she trusts him because he's the sheriff. And some of his line delivery, I was like, okay, that is a little weird or that's a little ominous sounding. But I was like, so I mean, it was like scratching my brain a little, and I was like, he's definitely a possibility, but I wasn't for sure because I couldn't think of motive. I was like, what real motive would he have had to kill anybody? Well, obviously we didn't know the motive until he told us, but yeah, some of the ways he even delivers the lines, it does have a little like sinister kind of twist to it that you can kind of write off as, oh, well, they're trying to make him also suspicious because, like you said, it's a slasher movie. We've got to throw suspicion on, every single character on screen at some point. I'm surprised, there wasn't a cat floated as a killer or something, or maybe an actual turkey. But yeah, I thought they did a good job of the reveal and the motive and all that. Like obviously in real life, this person would not have been able to pull off such a grand scheme because, you know, things always go wrong when you try to make up an intricate plan. You can't account for every single possibility. But I did like the fact that he was basically using Jessica for information by trying to solve the case, so to speak. But he already knew who the killer was because it was him. So he could get information about where people would be at certain times and slip in undetected.
Yeah, it did work really well. And I think I mean, he was obviously controlling the investigation into it, but he gave away enough of his plan to fellow police officers that it felt, I don't know, I mean, obviously he was in control and he was playing the game, so to speak, but by saying stuff like, "Oh, well, we can tell from this that the killer has to have a second location," or and I mean, he did. He was, just I guess leaving out the part that he knew exactly where that second location was. But I will say this is kind of this is an enjoyable movie once you know the ending to go back and rewatch to see how it all kind of plays out. I also do want to point out because it's towards the end. Um, Technology again, we've talked about how technology is used in this film, I think rather cleverly. Um, with like the Carver taunting the teens through, like you said, whatever their version of Instagram is in this world. But the killer, he live streams the deaths, or some of the deaths, when they're all sitting at the table. And part of me was kind of like, "Oh, that's really interesting that he chooses to do that, because is he not afraid of like getting caught?" And then I thought, um when he shows the camera, or the phone to the camera, you see the live stream and you see all the people giving these like thumbs up as like somebody is dying or like may die. And I thought that that kind of went with that social commentary that was plugged into the beginning of the movie a little bit, about how, again, I just wasn't expecting it, about how we kind of as a society view violence, and the reaction we have to it, but also I think probably this idea of vengeance and revenge that some of the other characters were also feeling in the film. And maybe they wouldn't actually go out and do it, but they were gleefully watching. I don't know. I don't know. Maybe I'm reading. I can't believe I'm reading that much into this film, honestly. Because but I mean, it's there. Like there is a surprising amount of social commentary, I think, that did not need to be in the film, but it was there, and we can kind of talk about it. But and then of course Jessica is able to live stream the sheriff's confession, like when he tells his whole story about why he's doing it, and he doesn't realize he's being live streamed, but she's able to do it. um So I did think that that was really kind of interesting. I also love that in this film, because every slasher, you've got to have your final girl. Jessica is obviously the final girl in this, but also every final girl needs her slasher, and the slasher can't die, and his body's never found.
I was going to bring that up. I'm glad you mentioned that. They do say his body's not there, and how conveniently they say, because it was such a strong explosion, it would have incinerated anything. My immediate thought was, no, no, no. Do you know how long it takes to completely get rid of human remains? I don't know the actual answer to that because I'm not a killer, but it's not like the 5 seconds that's implied in the film. So, um, and that actually does give us a little lead into the little bit of news that we discovered before we started recording, that at least according to the Wikipedia page for this web, or for this movie, there is a sequel in development that is tentatively scheduled for a 2025 release. So maybe we'll see John Carver 2, Carve Harder, or whatever they want to call it.
But how is he going to deal with the fact that there are indeed leftovers?
Well, I guess he'll have to warm them up. I don't know. I'm not a good writer for taglines.
I have to say that the tagline for this movie is, "This year there will be no leftovers," and um Patrick Dempsey gets to yell that once he's revealed as the killer and he's able to like hunt down Jessica in the old like warehouse where they keep the floats for the Thanksgiving Day parade. Uh he stands up in his Massachusetts Massachusetts accent and yells, this year there will be no leftovers, and that was fun. Yeah, I cheered for that. That was exactly what I wanted to see. But apparently, there are going to be some, I guess, threads from this movie that will be uh tied up, I guess, in the Thanksgiving too. I think the main character of Jessica has already signed on. Gabby has already signed on, who is played by Addison Rae. Um, I'm assuming, I don't know if Patrick Dempsey is back, but I'm assuming he would be. But um, apparently, several of the people have already signed on as uh, going to be part of this cast. So I don't know. I will watch it. I'm shocked that I enjoyed this movie as much as I did, but I really did. It's a fun movie. And there really aren't many uh Thanksgiving themed horror movies out there. I mean, there's a lot of Christmas ones. There's a lot of like winter ones. Um but unless you're going down like the Poultrygeist rabbit hole, there really aren't too many Thanksgiving horror movies. So, um
I I was
I'll
actually going to say pretty much exactly that. I mean, wasn't it just a couple of seasons ago that we were discussing the lack of Thanksgiving horror? I mean, there's a ton of Christmas. Obviously, the Halloween franchise alone has the corner on Halloween, but then also Friday the 13th and Nightmare on Elm Street get watched around Halloween as well. That there was a real lack of Halloween, or a real lack of Thanksgiving horror movies, and now we have at least one more that we can throw into the rotation. So I'll definitely be watching it next year.
Yeah, yeah, same. I think there are some horror movies that are like loosely set at like a family dinner that could be Thanksgiving. And then Hulu's Into the Dark did one called Pilgrim a few years ago that was um okay. But yeah, and then there are some that are like kind of sort of around Thanksgiving. Um, maybe just they don't actually involve the holiday but are set around that time. But uh anyway, yeah, I'm glad we have this one. I'm glad we finally have one. So, all right, well, unless we're gonna do like a deep dive into, like I said, Poltergeist or Things Killing, I don't know if there are many more of these Thanksgiving movies out there. So, thank you, Eli Roth, for giving us this gem. I enjoyed it so much more than I thought I would. If you've seen it, listeners, we'd love to know your thoughts. We are at No Fear Cast on Twitter and Instagram. We also have a Facebook page. Our email is nofearcast@gmail.com. If you love what we're doing, consider supporting us on Patreon. We have a lot of backup mini episodes that go back many seasons for you to listen to. We also have merch available at our website, nofearcast.com. So check that out. Or, of course, you can simply rate and review us, which is entirely free, but it does help other listeners find us. The music is by Nicholas Gasparini. We will be back in 2 weeks with a brand new episode.